All right. Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to a very special edition of Trey's Table. This is a podcast about African American history, politics, and culture. And I'm your host, Trey Smith, and I am proud to announce the very first guest on the podcast. That's right, the person who inspired me to do podcasting. And you can see that beautiful smile for those of you who get a chance to see the video version of this podcast. That's right, my very first guest, Jordan Smith. Jordan, thank you so much for joining us for this episode.
It's funny how you formally introduced me like I'm not your son.
Well, I think anyone who knows anything about me knows that I spend the majority of my conversations talking about two people, you and your sister. You two are the most important people in my life. I tell you, of all the things that I do and that I've been blessed with, being your parent and being Dominique's parent is just something that really, it's just the greatest blessing in the world. I'm proud of both of you, literally from the first moments you came into my life to today. Literally every source of joy, happiness, humor, satisfaction, pride, everything comes from the amazing accomplishments that you two have just brought to my life and the lives of so many people, you know, your mother, your grandparents, cousins, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, family, and all of them. So thank you for taking the time. I know that you are extremely busy. So with that sort of emotional introduction, why don't you go ahead and tell the listeners of the podcast a little bit about yourself and what you're doing now. You are currently a student where?
At St. Thomas University currently right now.
Okay, and what year are you in?
In my third year as of right now, third year.
Okay, and you are majoring in what?
Marketing management.
And do you participate in any extracurricular activities?
Maybe too many. So I do broadcasting as a sports commentator for St. Thomas University Sports, primarily known mainly for St. Thomas football, but I've also done basketball, baseball, flag football, softball. If there's a sport, I probably have done it at some point. I also am part of the track and field team as a sprinter in the 100 and 200 meter dash. Also, I'm starting my internship at Formula One next week, so that is another thing as well. And I also do have my own podcast as well, Blackout Combat, which primarily focuses on the mixed martial arts world, primarily speaking. And I think that I would say that is about it. Oh, I guess I post TikToks every now and then as well.
Okay, so let's see. You don't do that much. You're just a scholarship athlete. You also are heavily involved in sports broadcasting. You are taking a difficult major. You just secured a very prestigious internship. And you also have your own podcast and you're an athlete. So not a lot on your plate as far as what Jordan Wesley Smith does. I think it's fair to say that you are a lot like your mother. You're a Renaissance person who goes from strength to strength to strength. So, and let me just say, I know that your mother and your grandmother are going to be particularly happy to see that dorm room is clean. It looks very nice. So it's good to know that you are not doing what college students typically do, which is just dumping a load of laundry over in the corner. So, well, let me tell you why, in addition to all the amazing accomplishments that you have, that I wanted to have you on the podcast today. It's because you actually sent me a direct message via Instagram earlier talking about Eric Bieniemy. Now, for those of you who don't follow football or don't know, Eric Bieniemy just helped the Kansas City Chiefs win their second Super Bowl title. I think I'm correct about that, right? In the history of the franchise, they have, in the modern era, I think it's two championships, right? Both under coach Andy Reid, both with Patrick Mahomes as a quarterback, and both of them with Eric Bieniemy as the offensive coordinator. Eric Bieniemy, and son, you're too young to remember this now because a lot of this happened before you were born, but there used to be a Black coach in the NFL named Art Shell, and he coached
the Raiders.
That's correct. That's right. That's right. Not only are you a brilliant student of current events, but you also know history. Well, Al Davis was a trailblazer in a number of areas in terms of what he did with the NFL, innovative in marketing, but he was also a trailblazer in terms of being willing to hire an African American coach, and Art Shell, who coached the Raiders. But after Art Shell lost his job as a Raiders coach, he became the token interview coach. Every season, every off season, when NFL teams were looking for head coaches in order to satisfy the NFL's Rooney Rule. And for those of you who don't know a lot about the NFL, for quite some time now, there's been a rule in place. It's called the Rooney Rule, and it's named after Art Rooney and the Rooney family that own the Pittsburgh Steelers franchise. And the rule states that when teams are interviewing for head coaches, the initial rule stated that you had to have at least one minority candidate interviewed. Now, unfortunately, like a lot of diversity initiatives in our country, most teams made a mockery of it. And the way that they made a mockery of it was by having Art Shell come in. Sometimes they would interview him for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, knowing full well that they already wanted to hire a white coach, but they could check the box and satisfy the Rooney Rule by flying Art Shell in. And I'm exaggerating here. I almost want to say that he interviewed literally off season with every team, but it was an early indicator of some of the struggles that the NFL was going to have with the issue of diversity. And let's be very frank here. When we talk about diversity, what we're really talking about is the staggeringly low number of Black coaches in the NFL. In a league that's close to 70% Black, right? If you look at the players on the field, the offense and the defense, it's fair to say you take away Black players, you really don't have the NFL anymore. But as you go up the proverbial chain in terms of authority, when you look at the ranks of coaching, when you look in the league offices, team executives, things of that nature, you see fewer and fewer Black faces. And so the NFL has publicly stated that it has a commitment to trying to increase the ranks of minority coaches. But again, minority is the code phrase for Black coaches. And the NFL has had, I just have to say, a very disappointing record. I'll just say this: the year that you were born, okay, the year that you were born, there were 2 Black coaches in the NFL. 32 teams, 2 Black coaches. Now, you're going to be turning 21 next month. We're now in 2023. How many Black coaches do you think the NFL has now?
Like currently on staff as head coaches?
Right. So with off-season hires, so going into the new season, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'll tell you, unless there are some changes between now and the beginning of the season, the NFL will have increased the number of Black coaches by 1. That's right. There's a news story that just came out in U.S. News and World Report, and it is dated February 16th, 2023. And the title is Same Old, No Progress for Black Head Coaches in the NFL. And I'll just read the first couple of paragraphs here. After completing the latest round of coaching hires this week, the NFL won't look much different on the sideline in 2023. DeMeco Ryans was the lone Black candidate to land one of the 5 openings, which means the 32-team league remains stuck at just 3 Black coaches heading toward a new season for the 5th year in a row. All right. Now, here's what's so shocking about this. You may recall, you being a student of history and particularly NFL, how did Sean McVay end up getting his job as the head coach of the Rams? You recall, what was he known for?
If I remember correctly, I know he was under Mike Shanahan.
That's correct. That's correct.
For the Redskins.
That's correct.
I believe he was known as to be like the quarterback whisperer. That was like the narrative around Sean McVay. And so through that connection, that's how he landed the job with the Rams.
Exactly. And you recall a few years ago, if you had lunch with Sean McVay, if you got your hair cut or the same barber where Sean McVay got his haircut. If you looked like him, teams are going out and handing out lucrative contracts to mostly white coaches. The best example I can think of is Cliff Kingsbury. And black coaches were really not getting these opportunities. And what really struck me about the message that you sent me earlier was that you have two black offensive coordinators who've been responsible for Super Bowls the past 3 years. Okay. First one's Byron Leftwich in Tampa. Okay. A lot of people talk about Tom Brady and the magic that he brought to the team. There's no doubt about it. However, Byron Leftwich was the offensive coordinator for that team. And he was in the mix, at least for the Jacksonville Jaguars job, but he ended up, for whatever reasons, I think some legitimate ones, not taking the position. And now he's been let go from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and there was never any serious consideration given to him for some of the coaching vacancies. And then there's Eric Bieniemy, who has had the Chiefs in the mix for the playoffs and the Super Bowl every year for at least the past 3 or 4 years. The Chiefs have made the playoffs and they've advanced at least to the championship game. And so he's got 2 Super Bowls underneath his belt. And his offensive play calling, particularly in the second half of this most recent Super Bowl, was superb. And yet the best that he can get is an interview to be the offensive coordinator for the Washington Commanders. And so I guess what I really wanted to do is have this discussion with you and talk to you and get your thoughts about why you believe it's still so difficult for the NFL to do the right thing with regard to black coaches. But before we do that, what I want to do is play something which at the time seemed extraordinary. I think it's even more extraordinary now. So what I'm going to do here is hit this, and then I'm going to play something, and so if I can find it here. All righty. And
it has been a difficult time for our country, in particular, black people in our country. First, my condolences to the families of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and all the families who have endured police brutality. We, the National Football League, condemn racism and the systematic oppression of black people. We, the National Football League, admit we were wrong for not listening to NFL players earlier and encourage all to speak out and peacefully protest. We, the National Football League, believe Black Lives Matter. I personally protest with you and want to be part of the much needed change in this country. Without black players, there would be no National Football League. And the protests around the country are emblematic of the centuries of silence, inequality, and oppression of black players, coaches, fans, and staff. We are listening. I am listening. And I will be reaching out to players who have raised their voices and others on how we can improve and go forward for a better and more united NFL family. It has been a difficult time for our country, in particular.
All right, so that was a clip of NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell. And that was back in 2020 after the George Floyd protest. I remember watching that video at the time and being shocked because you had the leader of one of the largest corporations in the United States saying something that's extraordinary. He acknowledges systemic racism. He acknowledges the oppression of Black people and the role that the NFL has played in that. talks about the fact that you would have no NFL without black players. He talks about how he wants to protest with black players and how he wants to listen and make change. I have a friend of mine who's very cynical, and he said, you know what they're going to do? They're going to say the right things, and at most we'll have black people do the halftime shows, and that's it. And I think you can make an argument that maybe my cynical friend was correct, because as far as the hiring of black coaches, things have not improved significantly. But we don't even, I mean, we'd have to take 3 hours or 4 hours to talk about black ownership in the NFL. But since George Floyd's murder and the Black Lives Matter protest of 2020, at most we've had just a more diverse, aka black halftime show, and money going to Jay-Z and his organizations, and slogans on the back of helmets. So I guess I want to throw it out to you and just say, you know, why do you think the NFL continues to struggle with this issue with regard to progress for black head coaches? And do you think that it will ever change?
So I think to tackle this issue, we have to actually go back. So let's take a step back before we talk about coaching. Let's talk about the most prized position in all of football, the quarterback. Quarterback is seen as the leader, the alpha of the team, the head honcho. And historically speaking, and in fact, I saw a video the other day by this guy. His name was Rico on TikTok, and he said that basically that the bias against black quarterbacks has not existed since Warren Moon, which anybody who has paid attention at all to the NFL knows how ridiculous of a claim that is. And his claim is that, oh, NFL teams don't care if you're black, white, or that. Like, obviously, Warren Moon, that was a situation. But all the black quarterbacks who get asked to switch positions, that was just because they were super athletic and they had all these physical traits. And he said, think about this. What about Julian Edelman? He was told to switch positions. What about Tim Tebow? Tim Tebow didn't cut it, eventually played tight end. And so let me reverse address that narrative. There's exceptions to every rule, of course. Yes, you can find non-black quarterbacks who were asked to change positions. But the thing is, no disrespect to Julian Edelman, Tim Tebow. There was another guy he mentioned, but we're going to use those two in particular, okay? First things first. Tim Tebow is not a good example, because do you realize Tim Tebow got every chance he really could? And I like Tim Tebow, but he's historically had the worst throwing mechanics we've ever seen in the NFL, for one. And Julian Edelman, for a lack of a better term, was just not good. Like, he was that not untalented, but just not good enough to play quarterback to where he didn't get a chance. It wasn't a matter of that there's this color blindness going on with QBs. You can even look at this when you look at high school rankings, when they rank quarterbacks. What a lot of people may not know, quarterbacks are not ranked the same. You have pro style and dual threat, which a lot of the time, especially even recently, when you hear dual threat, that's just a dog whistle for black, just straight up. And then they'll say, oh, well, they never asked Jameis Winston to switch positions. They never asked Patrick Mahomes, because you want to know why? Okay. Patrick Mahomes had to be super exceptional to not get asked to switch positions. Lamar Jackson won the award that tells you who is the best player in all of college football. Lamar Jackson won that award. Lamar Jackson is arguably, you can make the argument, one of the 10 greatest college football players to ever play at the collegiate level. And what was the entire draft narrative going into the draft class? Oh, Lamar, I think he's a running back. Oh, Lamar, I don't know. Lamar, I think you might need to go at wide receiver. He doesn't have the arm talent. Yet, statistically speaking, and this isn't me just making this up, you can go look this up for yourself. Lamar Jackson statistically was one of the most accurate quarterbacks going into that draft. But you know why? Because there's a narrative of black man just can't throw accurate. Black man can only just run fast out of the pocket. And it's always the pocket this, the pocket that. Yet, no disrespect to this guy, because this guy has been really good. But Josh Allen obviously he's had a bit of a regression year. I will call it a bit of a regression year. Started off really hot in the first half. He's a guy who uses a lot of design QB runs, and he has physical traits. He's 6'5", 6'6" maybe. pretty big, and he doesn't slide. He lowers his shoulder down and he runs, but yet no one calls him a running back. No one asks him to go play running back or tight end. Not one person, even though statistically at Wyoming, which it paid off. He's a top 5, or at least at minimum top 7 quarterback in the league. But yet Lamar Jackson, again, there was speculation of if he would even be playing quarterback at the next level, which seems ridiculous because you had guys like Josh Rosen and Baker Mayfield who were seen to be more, and Sam Darnold, who were seen to be more surefire than Lamar, because, again, the narrative of, oh, black quarterbacks just are not either good leaders or black quarterbacks. And have you always noticed, for some odd reason, again, maybe I'm just making this up, why is there always, whenever a black quarterback, especially when they're high in the draft, character issues? What does that even mean? It's like, oh, I don't know. Cam Newton, I heard he's got some character issues, Cam Newton, I don't know. It's like Tom Brady can smash a tablet into 30,000 pieces. Aaron Rodgers can just straight up bash his coach in the media and call his receivers trash. Cam Newton literally wears a goofy outfit to the press conference, and it's, oh, he's a distraction. Oh my goodness, Cam Newton, he doesn't care about football. It's just all about him. He's selfish. It's all him. And also, who is the most notorious bust at quarterback? Like, who, when people say who's like when they talk about the biggest bust, who's the one that people just harp on the most? Jamarcus Russell.
So exactly. When you watch ESPN and sports shows and they'll say, oh, Jamarcus Russell was the biggest bust. And they conveniently forget Ryan Leaf.
Yes.
Who a lot of people during the year that he was drafted thought that he was a better quarterback prospect than Peyton Manning. And now Ryan Leaf, unfortunately had some serious addiction issues and some other issues, which fortunately it appears that he's, been able to conquer, and he's moved on with his life and is doing some good things. But let's remember, you make an important point here, which is part of the trouble, part of the problem that Black coaches have. It goes to the stereotypes that a lot of people in sports media have about who's properly equipped to play the most important position in the NFL, quarterback, and the use of language. And I think you raise a very important point, which is why I'm so happy that you're doing the work that you do. If you want to get diversity on the field, I think an essential ingredient is to have diversity in the broadcast booth, and to have people who won't utter some of those, frankly, racist statements during games, pre-game, post-game, but also during the daily shows. I mean, you and I both know this. There are some people who get up and literally from the moment they turn on the TV until the moment they go to sleep, they consume all of these sports shows that are out there. There are literally thousands of sports shows available on streaming, on the traditional TV networks, but also podcast and radio. And for the most part, people who look like us, people who have the backgrounds that we have, are not as well represented as we should be. And so that's why you will have this incessant focus on things like, for example, rather than looking at Cam Newton and saying there's something with his outfits, why not just appreciate the fact that here's a man who likes avant-garde fashion, who has a very successful fashion line that employs a number of people, and on top of that, is an incredibly good citizen off the field. There are literally thousands of young kids who can say that they've benefited from scholarships and off-season camps conducted by Cam Newton. But let's be very, very frank about this, and you hit on something. It's the NFL executives, people like Bill Polian and others, right? People who are revered for their wisdom in terms of being able to select players and to conduct draft sessions in a very professional and amazing way. And more often than not, they fail when it comes to picking quarterbacks, because we could forget it's a very difficult thing to do. But you're right, there is a higher barrier that's put on Black people with regard to being drafted quarterback and the chances they get. And that, I think, spills over into the perception of whether or not we have the capability to be head coaches. Deadspin did a great story back in January of 2022, and I was shocked. I mean, I knew these stats, but when I looked at this, it really, really shocked me just how few Black coaches, right, have been hired in the NFL since 2000. Lovie Smith, Marvin Lewis, Tony Dungy, Mike Tomlin, Jim Caldwell, Anthony Lynn, Romeo Crennel, Marvin Lewis, Leslie Frazier, Brian Flores, Herm Edwards. That's it. So again, Lovie Smith, Marvin Lewis, Tony Dungy, Mike Tomlin, Jim Caldwell, Anthony Lynn, Romeo Crennel, Herm Edwards, Leslie Frazier, and Brian Flores. Okay. Now we're going to add DeMeco Ryans to that list now. That's it. That is it. And, you know, what's depressing is the headline, which is true here. It says, Black coaches are usually hired to clean up a white coach's mess and then replaced by another white coach that rarely turns out to be a better option. You know this, being a student of the game. Coaches can't do everything. I mean, NFL franchises are too big. You're talking about a 53-man roster. And so it's not just a coach, it's the staff. When Black coaches get hired, what that tends to do, I mean, tell our listeners, what's the importance for diversity when a Black coach gets hired? What does that do?
I think the most important thing is, again, when you have a predominantly Black populated sports, so a majority of the players are going to be Black, it kind of gives a sense of, it's a lot of time people don't understand representation. People think representation is just putting a Black face for the sake of putting a Black face. I use the example of my little cousin Kevin, right? When I grew up watching Spider-Man, the only Black Spider-Man I saw was when he was evil and his suit turned Black. My cousin now lives in a world where he can see a superhero that resembles him and that resonates with him. So I think it's the same thing you can then allude to with NFL players, where they can see a guy who can understand where they're coming from. And it's not a matter of like this, for lack of a better term, like this master and then you have the servants, but rather an equal, more playing field in terms of power dynamics.
Absolutely. Amazing point. Amazing point. Representation, the idea of being able to say, I see them doing this and I know I can accomplish it. And I think another point that you and I have talked about too, which is that with Black coaches, you tend to have then more opportunities for Black coaching assistants, which is really the pipeline. Okay. That's why I shout out to Andy Reid, who I will always declare an honorary brother, because Andy Reid, did a lot and has done a lot to promote Eric Bieniemy. I mean, every offseason he's tried to encourage other teams to give Eric Bieniemy a shot. And I think it's no coincidence, because which coach, and I mean, of course we know it's Andy Reid, but look at the Black quarterbacks that he successfully had. Donovan McNabb, Michael Vick, and now Pat Mahomes. So Andy Reid, I think it's something of a template and a model for this idea of breaking these stereotypes about what Black men can accomplish and what they can do. You look at Mike Tomlin, for example. Mike Tomlin, really, if you talk to a lot of younger African-American coaches, they'll say that not only does he bring them into the organization, but he does a lot of informal mentoring, even if they are not within the organization. So, I mean, you look at some of the white coaches. Chris Rock has a very funny skit where he says, true equality is not the ability to be able to succeed like whites, but the ability to be able to fail like them. In other words, a white coach has a bad season, and what happens? Maybe he gets 2 or 3 more, and then he gets a chance to go to college. Okay, here, I see you raising your hand.
All right, what's the name of that coach for the Chargers? His name just slipped my mind.
Yes. I call him Coach Go For It. He's the one who's always going for it on the fourth down. Let me see. Chargers.
I know. How did I forget his name? His name just
Brandon Staley. Staley.
Okay. I want you. We're gonna do a thought experiment really quickly. All right. Okay. So Brandon Staley managed to blow what was it the biggest lead in all of the NFL playoffs, or is it? I don't know if it's the biggest, but it's one of the biggest leads. Two, the
It
team
is. It is. Mhm.
from a team from the worst division in football,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Played his starters in a meaningless game at the end of the season and got a star receiver injured because of it. Well, I won't say he directly caused Mike Williams to get injured, but why are you playing your starters minutes like that and when there's no playoff implications at all? Look me dead in the eye and tell me if Lovie Smith did that, he'd be with the Chargers next season.
So I can't look you in the eye and say that because you and I both know, what would happen. And the bottom line is Brandon Staley, if Brandon Staley were instead a black coach, you'd start to have certain phrases being used. For example, like, is he good enough at the X's and O's? Is he good at time management? Does he really understand the game? Okay. Look at Mike Tomlin, for example, who has an amazing record in terms of having a winning record during the regular season, right? I think I'm correct in saying this, like going all the way up through this season in terms of the regular season, he's always been at least 500. Never had a losing season during his coaching tenure, okay? And yet he's viewed as more so of a motivator and a guy who really rallies the troops in the locker room. But then you look at someone like the Patriots head coach, Bill Belichick, who's seen as this genius and this savant, despite the fact that for the past 2 seasons, the Patriots have been a mediocre team at best and were frankly a terrible team this past season. And, I will tell you this, certainly I don't want to take anything away from Bill Belichick in terms of his achievements, what he's done, but he's a classic example of luck and being in the right place at the right time. People forget he was on his way to potentially being fired as the Patriots head coach until Drew Bledsoe got knocked out of a game, almost died, and then Tom Brady came in. And since Tom Brady has been gone, I think we've been able to answer the question, who was more responsible for the success that the Patriots had during that time? Okay. So, again, it's perception. In other words, when white coaches do certain things, how is it characterized as opposed to if black coaches did the same thing?
And I want to add on to that. How have Belichick's successors, like people in his tree, what happens when they go out? Matt Patricia went out and tried to be a head coach for the Lions. Why on earth are you hiring Matt Patricia as an offensive coordinator? There was never any evidence that Matt Patricia is a guy that you want to hand the keys over to designing your play calls. It's so bad that you have Mac Jones really yelling at him and just waving him off because, again, and then I always mix up the McDaniels. Is it Josh McDaniels?
It's Josh McDaniels. It's Josh. Let's give him another chance, McDaniels.
Josh McDaniels has been ran out of town in Denver. Is he still with have Las Vegas got rid of him yet, or is he still there?
Oh, he's still there with the Raiders. And then he accepted the Colts position, right? And then backed out. Am I correct, right? Wasn't that a few years ago where he was going to assume? Yeah, he was going to take the Colts position. And, I don't think we can talk about the opportunities that black coaches don't get without talking about the example of Jeff Saturday. Now, let's be very clear. Jeff Saturday is one of my favorite people. I love how he stood up to Peyton Manning, and I get the impression, I think you even said it, that he, for a period of time, was like the NFL's version of Ted Lasso, gave some amazing inspirational speeches. But he is a classic example of how the standards that people tend to insist on black coaches having get waived when it comes to white coaches. Jeff Saturday had no coaching experience, zilch. Okay. Zero. And I'm trying to think of what made him qualified to be a coach other than the fact that he was a very good player for the Colts. And then he proceeded to come in and have some spectacular failures as a coach. In fact, his record was worse than the person that he replaced. And towards the end of the season, people were joking that ESPN was incredibly happy because they knew that he'd be returning back to their TV shows because of how poor a job he did. And of course, in an off season where someone like Eric Bieniemy is available, or someone like Steve Wilks is available from the Carolina Panthers, Brian Flores, who do the Colts give their coaching position to?
Frank
Well,
Reich.
you follow. Well, they actually did not, because they let Frank Reich go. But I'm going to tell you, the Colts' new head coach. So the Panthers, I think, gave it to Frank Reich, right?
Oh, I mixed them up. He's on the Panthers.
Yeah,
Colts.
you're right. Yeah, you're right. The Colts' new head coach is Shane Steichen. Shane Steichen, who was the Eagles' offensive coordinator. So now let's just think about this for a second. The Eagles played an amazing game.
Okay? Right.
But they lost to the Chiefs. The offensive coordinator for the team who lost, who's white, is now going to be the head coach for the Colts. The offensive coordinator for the team who won cannot get a head coaching job.
Yeah.
Now, go ahead, son.
Yeah. See, the thing with that is just so, I mean, there's a lot of different ways. I will say another thing I feel like that's the biggest dog whistle in terms of Black coaching is defensive-minded coach. It's like the biggest narrative. Like, how many Black coaches get the credit of being an offensive guru, a quarterback whisperer? Oh, he just knows how to make the right. I don't like to do this because I don't want to take away from a guy. I'll give credit to Kyle Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan for what he was able to do offensively for the 49ers, especially going through Jimmy G, Trey Lance, Brock Purdy, Josh Johnson, and Christian McCaffrey for like 2 snaps. I'll give him credit. He kept the boat afloat the entire way. However, here's where the however comes in. Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, the best player in football, Trent Williams, left tackle, Christian McCaffrey with the trade, Brandon Ayuk. Now, obviously, again, good coaches are going to need good players. I'm not disputing that at all. However, there is something to be said, at least, to where Kyle Shanahan, I give him all the credit in the world for what he's done with the 49ers offense. At the same time, though, how is it we have a guy, like we just said, with the Chiefs offensive coordinator, who lost, who could maybe argue the best wide receiver in football? I wouldn't call him the best wide receiver, but a lot of people do. Lost him. Your top 3 receivers, you've got Juju Smith-Schuster, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and who third is up for debate in terms of who you call the wide receiver 3. The best receiving target is obviously Travis Kelce. I think that's not up for debate. But you lose one of the biggest pieces of your offense in Tyreek Hill, and yet did not miss a beat at all. And yet that guy is not being hailed as an offensive guru and a genius, at least by major media outlets. I mean, we're going to go back to Cliff Kingsbury again. This dude wasn't even good in college. That's what I don't understand about Cliff. Like, I understand, again, he kind of looks like Sean McVay if you squint a little bit. And I don't know, he tried to bring the college spread offense to the Cardinals for the preseason and realized, okay, this doesn't work. So then he started using a Madden playbook. Now, I think Cliff Kingsbury would not be bad as an OC. I don't think he'd be bad at that. But in terms of a head coaching role, what did he show at any level to say, you know what, this guy is the guy I want in charge of everything? Yet, again, we look at the Chiefs OC, it's just, it's Andy Reid. Now, give credit to Andy Reid, absolutely. But, again, anybody who understands how coaching works, it does not just go on the head coach, and that's the end-all, be-all. As someone who's a Ravens fan, right, one of the biggest things Ravens fans were talking about, Ravens fans never said fire John Harbaugh. I always mixed them two up. We weren't saying fire John Harbaugh. You know what we were saying? Greg Roman, because
Right.
it seems a lot of the time people don't understand the role in which coordinators play. And that ties me back to Kyle Shanahan. Because the guy who we should really, because as much talk as we give about the offense, DeMeco Ryans, again, now glad he got credit and he got the job for the Texans. And it seems that they are going to be invested in, I hope. But again, he has commanded arguably the best defense in all of football throughout this season. And again, all the talk we kind of heard, because I'll be honest, if DeMeco Ryans did not go out looking for a job and get hired, I guarantee you all we would have heard about in terms of coaching was Kyle Shanahan. And again, I don't like saying like as if Kyle Shanahan does not deserve credit. But again, the reason the offense was able to operate as conservatively as it was and be able to switch through quarterbacks like that is because the defense was playing at a super elite level. And last thing I'm going to say is for the Panthers, what more does he have to do? He took a team that were literally supposed to be bottom feeders. They had no business even making a run at the playoffs, and they got this close. They really almost got there after going through P.J. Walker, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, and yet they were almost right there. And he can't win the job. Frank Reich. And you know they said about Frank Reich. Oh, well, but Frank Reich, don't think about it. He didn't have his right guy at quarterback. They had a carousel quarterback. He didn't have his guy.
Exactly. I think you made the point one time, which is when a Black coach fails, he's the reason why. Okay. And when I say fails in quotes here, so when a Black coach is in charge of a team, they don't do well, it's on him. And on the other hand, when a white coach fails, excuses are given for it. Well, if he had a better quarterback, well, if he had a better receiving core, well, if the general manager supported him more. And so, that brings me to something that I wanted to discuss with you, which is this. It seems like you're well on your way, in terms of your career to having some role in sports media. You obviously know a lot about sports. You know how to talk about it in a very intelligent way that's also accessible. What advice, if any, do you have for students of color, people of color who want to pursue the path that you've pursued? What tips or advice would you give them if they want to pursue a career in sports media?
I'm going to give a very raw and gritty answer. So the first thing first, you have to have thicker skin than anybody. So to open up about this, especially if you're also a Black woman as well, especially because I would say being a Black woman, what I'm about to say is really times 10. You have to have some of the thickest skin than anybody. You will get called unprofessional for things that don't even seem like I'm not saying it as a foregone conclusion, but it's something to be expected. You're like, the margin of error is a lot smaller. For example, I'll use an example. A non-person of color commentator, white commentator can say, "Oh my goodness, bro," but use something along the lines of AAVE. You're using slang. You're unprofessional. You're dirtying up the product. If you show too much emotion, you're doing too much. You're overreacting. But you see, who's an example I want to use? Who do I want to use as an example?
Can I offer one? Think of the way that the media early on in his career viewed Chris Berman versus some of the criticism that African-American sport commentators, and I'm thinking of the late, great Stuart Scott, got. Chris
Right.
Berman, first off, and let's remember, you're young, so let me tell you, Chris Berman had no experience in sports. He was a lawyer who got tired of doing it. And he knew some people who were involved in the creation of ESPN. And he said, you know what? I'd love to do sports commentating. That's it. No background in it whatsoever. Hadn't played sports in a significant way himself. Again, as a background lawyer, I wanted to become an institution at ESPN and would do some incredibly unique things. I guess that's the best way I can say it when he was calling games. But then Stuart Scott, he's talked about a lot, before his death, the criticism that he got early on because of his use of hip hop lyrics or what's viewed as the Black vernacular. What were we going to say, son? I think you were going to say something before I jumped in.
Yes. And so I say you have to have thick skin because there's going to be times where you're going to want to say something. You're going to want to feel frustrated. In fact, I use an example where I don't care. I will speak on this how I speak on it. Anyone who feels any type of way can feel how they want. I had someone who used to work in my network. I've met him 1 or 2 times, right? Again, I always say, I think the proof's in the pudding. I will stack up my resume, my work against anybody at all. If there's a lot of things I will let you say about me, but the one thing I think you can never say about me is I don't have a knowledge of the game. If anybody listens to my broadcast and says, this guy does not know what he's talking about in terms of football, you already had a preconceived notion about me. And that's not me being cocky. That's not me being full of myself. But I mean, literally, I'm calling plays before it happens. I'm calling it out at the line of scrimmage. Tony Romo does it. He's a genius. I do it, and it just gets ignored because I show some emotion on a broadcast. Because again, a lot of the time, what people seem to fail to realize is, as a play-by-play or even a color commentator, depending on the role and how the dynamic is, I think the biggest thing people don't realize is no one cares about you telling them the moment. Literally no, and I think a lot of broadcasters get mad when I say this because it seems like I'm minimizing the job. No, you have to make people feel the moment, not just tell them about it. I'll tell you this. We go back to 2016, Cavs versus the Warriors. Kyrie shoots the fadeaway. There's one word everybody remembers. Bang! You don't even remember the sentence leading up to it. No one really remembers. But you hear bang and you feel the goosebumps. Same thing I think applies in terms of football broadcasting or any type of sport broadcasting. I believe that if you don't make the audience feel the moment, I don't think you're doing your job. Because if you are watching with 2 pairs of eyes, they already know what just happened. Now, if you want to talk about getting into the breakdowns and the nuances of it, as a color commentator, that's one thing. But as a play-by-play, just relaying the action like it's radio, that's dead. I think that's an old and dying art, and I think it is slowly being taken away. What's that guy's name? Joe Buck?
Right.
I don't like saying this because it's going to sound like I'm burning a bridge, but again, Joe Buck to me, as I give him all the respect that I can, but I think he has a thing of making moments that seem like if you were watching the game in the crowd, you'd go like, oh my goodness, this is so crazy. Just be, whatever. And maybe some people like that. It's not my personal cup of tea, but I think there's a reason why the UFC commentary is, I think, the most well-renowned commentary team in all of sports. You can look across all sports. People know the UFC commentators a lot better than any other sport because, again, what the UFC commentators do super well compared to every other sport is they make you feel the moment. They don't just tell you what happened. Sometimes some moments don't even need to be said. Sometimes some things are so great that anything you could say would not justify in that moment, but rather something very concise, but also very energetic, I think will do the job. Now, this is, again, my opinion, but I believe this to be true. But to segue back into the situation that I was referring to, he tweets at you because you tweeted saying, where's the St. Thomas broadcast for football? They made this very exciting. He goes out of his way. Now, again, I've met this guy, I believe, 1 or 2 times, shook my hand, had nothing bad to say to me while I was around him. Gets on Twitter and says, oh, I disagree. All this guy does is scream and he has no knowledge of the game. What? Like, again,
right.
And when this was brought to my attention, you know what I was told? Oh, don't say anything. You're gonna look unprofessional. So he gets to go out of his way and say this about me, and he's the golden boy, and he's just sharing his opinion. But if I reply back, it's I'm getting out of character, I'm unprofessional, and I don't want to look bad. What? But again, that's the challenges you're going to run into. I had a guy, again, who at the time was my director of my department of communications, literally during halftime, to me and my color commentating partner, Manny, who is Puerto Rican, basically straight up cursed at us and mock us while giving criticism. And then at the end of the statement says, "Oh, you can paint me as the a-hole if you want, but I'm just doing this out of love." If I talked to you that same exact way, I would be out of there immediately. There's a time and place for everything. My thing is, if you had such an issue with how I did things beforehand, you said it to me before the game, or say that afterwards. But during halftime, unless I did something super egregious, like step out of line, like say something like derogatory or vulgar, I'd get that, but I didn't. So for that to happen again, in that moment, I could have easily have said, you know what, forget this. I'm not dealing with this. And I could have walked away from that situation and just throw my hands up and just be done with it. And a lot of people would say I'd be justified for doing so. But the reality is, again, if you're going to be I'm just going to just call a spade, no pun intended, a Black sports broadcaster in any sense of the name, not independently, this is stuff you're just going to have to deal with. And it's not right. And I'm not saying it as something that should be celebrated or should be normalized, but until time passes by and these things die down, and more people in these roles who will look out for you get into it, that's unfortunately the name of the game. And also, I guess what I would say too is another piece of advice I would give to young Black aspiring sportscasters is never, and I say never, ever. It might sound like I'm contradicting what I just said about having thick skin. Don't ever sacrifice who you are. As much as people will tell you to fit the mold, as much as people will tell you to say things differently, as much as people will tell you to dress a certain way, as much as people will tell you to say these things, do not, I repeat, do not fundamentally change yourself. Now, obviously, there may be adjustments you may need to make if you're climbing your way up the ladder. But at the end of the day, if you climb all the way up to the ladder to the point of you're unrecognizable, when you finally get there, either A, you will not enjoy yourself, or B, you'll end up like Jason Whitlock. And I don't want you to end up like Jason Whitlock. And I mean, I'll use another example too. I wouldn't say this guy in particular has fundamentally changed himself, but Shannon Sharpe, again, has to sit there across a guy who basically told him, put your glasses back on.
Right.
Had a guy in his face, he's better than you. You're jealous. Straight to his face. And he had to sit there and just take that blatant disrespect. Now, as much as the platform of being on Undisputed is great, and I'm sure that he's doing well, would you rather be him or be Bomani Jones with a guy in, I feel bad for because he's literally one of my favorites. Who's the guy with Bomani Jones was highly questionable? It was
Pablo Torre.
Lebitard. Would you rather be in a platform with Dan Lebitard, where you're gonna have a guy
Dan Lebitard, yes.
Dan Lebitard will never step out of line. Dan Lebitard has never even once dared cross the line with Bomani Jones. Maybe highly questionable didn't reach the heights of an Undisputed, but I guarantee you Bomani Jones was never losing sleep working with Dan Lebitard, not once.
Absolutely. So, I mean, excellent point, son. Having thick skin, which you just have to have being Black in this country, because as long as we have a framework of white supremacy and racism, you're going to have the emotional fortitude that you have. And let me just tell you, one of the most amazing things about watching you grow and develop into a young man is your strength of character. I mean, I will tell you that you have motivated and inspired me in ways that you don't know. And, the situation that you've talked about in terms of people, they're always going to be critics, but I think it may sting a little bit when you know that the criticism has no basis in fact, and that there's perhaps a racial angle. And the way that you handle that was just exemplary. And I also like to your message of authenticity. One of the prongs of white supremacy, one of the prongs of anti-Blackness is the notion that You have to water yourself down. You have to assimilate. And you are a proud Black man. And that Blackness is something that doesn't limit you. It defines you in some ways, but not in every way. And so what you've said is, look, I'm going to be who I am, and I'm going to recognize that I can get valid criticism and I can grow, but I also have the strength and the courage to call out race when I see it. So thanks for that amazing advice. So let me close with this, because I know you have some studying to do. Someone asked me the other day, said, your son's incredible. I tell you, every chance I get, I forward the clips of your broadcasting that you do all the games, and people, especially who knew you when you were younger, they're really impressed with your knowledge of the game. And I call you Sports Google. In other words, if my phone's not working and I can't Google something, I call you because I know that you're going to know. You know that back from our trivia days as a primetime players. I always felt comfortable when it was a sports question because I know that you would know, especially folks, if you're listening to this podcast, this kid, I call you a kid. Sorry, this man is amazing. He knows anything and everything about NBA rosters, football rosters. I mean, just an encyclopedic knowledge of sports. But people ask me, well, how do you think he has this? Well, first off, he has a brilliant mother, comes from, just brilliant family members. His sister's a math and an art genius. He's a genius himself. But what I want to do now for those fans of the podcast is show you a pretty early broadcast of some of his talent. And I think I can see that smile. He knows what's coming. And I'm going to show you something that's still near and dear to my heart. So let me find this here. All right. And it's going to come in a second. And boom, boom, boom. Here we go.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James, and this is my son, Jordan. Say hi, Jordan.
Hey.
All right, and welcome to the first of an ongoing series this summer, James and Jordan on Sports. Well, as you know, right now we're going to be seeing tonight Game 3 of the NBA Finals, which pits the Miami Heat against the Oklahoma City Thunder. And let me just say, having watched the first two games, it's been quite an exciting series so far. The first two games, as you know, were in Oklahoma City, and the team split. The Oklahoma City Thunder took the first game, and then the Miami Heat took the second game in quite a thriller. And so tonight is a very pivotal Game 3, which is going to be taking place in Miami. And it's the first of 3 games in Miami because, as you know, in the NBA Finals, there are 7 games, and there's a 2-3-2 format. First 2 games in Oklahoma City, next 3 games in Miami, and if necessary, the final 2 games in Oklahoma City. So, Jordan, give us some things we need to watch out for here in Game 3 and your prediction as to who's going to win.
All right. Now, the main reason why how the Thunder won the first game was the Miami Heat's defense. The Miami Heat's defense needs to step up a lot ever since because they have to watch out for these 3 key players: Kevin Durant,
Russell Westbrook.
Yeah, Russell Westbrook and James Harden. Anyway, the reason they won the second game was which may become to a surprise to you who haven't watched much of the game, was Chris Bosh. Now, for y'all who are not big fans of Chris Bosh, I can understand that, but he's a big key player that the Heat cannot play without. So the Thunder defense has to put double on him. James Harden was a huge scorer in the who they play against before they went to
the San Antonio Spurs.
The San Antonio Spurs, and who were the ones before that?
Before that, they played against the Dallas Mavericks.
James Harden was the big key player for all scoring. So D Wade and whoever's going to be his backup has to put double on James Harden because not the whole game, but you have to watch out for James Harden, his scoring and his outside shooting. And Serge Ibaka, he's also great in the inside. So watch out for his rebounds and layups.
Now, let me just say that you were a very cute young boy, as you can see in that clip there. For those of you who are interested, that is on my YouTube channel. That was a series that Jordan and I did a long time ago called Papa and Jordan Talking About Sports. And you know what? You ended up being right in that prediction. You predicted that the Heat would go on to win that series against the Thunder. And there's also another clip that I'll add a link to in the episode notes here where you accurately predicted Eli Manning and the New York Giants beating Tom Brady and the Patriots in the Super Bowl. So, you know, son, I really do believe in the idea that God blesses people with talents. And if people are lucky and they're in the right environment, they're going to be surrounded by people who love them. They're going to help nurture those talents. So, and when I think of you, I think of one phrase, which is that you were born to do this. And it's just such a beautiful thing to see you grow up into this amazing, intelligent, articulate, and really principled man with just great character. And I hope you know that as your father, I love you so much. And just everything that you do makes me proud every day. And I want to show you one final thing. A good friend of mine, Patricia Oliphant, she did something one day and she made a series of coasters. I don't know if you can see this here, but this is a picture of you and I at an Orlando Magic game. And there you are cheering. And there I am cheering too as well. When I think back about great moments in my life, most of them involve sporting events with you, sports. I love going to games with you. I love watching basketball games because you can help me identify the majority of the players. You can help me understand the game better. And I really thank you for coming to talk about this issue of the NFL, race, Black coaches. And so I just want to close with this. If you give the NFL a grade since Roger Goodell gave the Black Lives Matter speech, grade A all the way to F, how would you rate the NFL as far as its treatment of Black coaches? So you got the 2 thumbs down. So am I correct in saying that that's an F? You know, I'm going to say that I have to agree with you. I think it has been a failure just because I think, like a lot of organizations in the United States, in 2020, I think it's important for us to realize how frightening a time period it was for a lot of major organizations. We had COVID going on. We had the George Floyd protest. And I can't help but come to the conclusion, I think the same conclusion that you've reached, which is that the NFL engaged in sort of the Black Instagram square strategy of saying, hey, we'll just post and tweet and give speeches and that'll be enough. And yet here we are with the same number of Black head coaches. And listen, I'm a big fan of African-American music like Dr. Dre and 50 Cent and Mary J. Blige and Rihanna. But if all we're going to get out of Roger Goodell's speech is more Black music at halftime, then I think the only grade that we can give the NFL is an F. So I know we talked about this at the beginning, but for those who are interested in seeing what you do on social media, you know, how can they find you? What are your social media handles and how can they find Blackout Combat?
So in terms of Instagram and TikTok, it's the same @ which is Zombie Man J, but the J is Jay. There's no underscores or dots. So Zombie Man J, Jay for J. Blackout Combat, the Instagram and TikTok is the same @ as well. So Blackout, but instead of a C for combat, it would be K. Anything. If you want to tune in live to any of my broadcasts, you can go to sundigitalnetwork.com under St. Thomas University. So usually the basketball season just ended in terms of the regular season. I don't think there's any more basketball games. So mainly, I believe as of right now, I think I will be doing primarily flag football. I do baseball on Sunday, maybe. So they have a baseball game on Sunday. So sundigitalnetwork.com under St. Thomas channel. That's the way you can listen to my live broadcast or any archives. And if you do want something where I have every single thing that I just mentioned all in one place, you can go to blackoutcombat.net, my own personal website. So everything I just said, if that was too much for you, it's all in one place in my About section. You can just click on it and it'll take you to wherever you want to go. It has my Spotify link. has the Instagram link as well. And I think that is really about it. But I want to say one last thing about the Black head coaches thing. If anyone has any doubt about anything that we've just said for however many minutes or how long this has went, Lovie Smith was literally brought in to clean up one of the worst messes and from, what's his name, Bill O'Brien, or am I mixing him up?
Yes.
Bill O'Brien.
Yes.
Who literally traded away DeAndre Hopkins for a bag of chips. Obviously, was a bit out of their control, the loss of Deshaun Watson with that controversy. Yet, he's brought in to basically have no chance at all, no chance of any type of success. And the worst thing he ever did was win a game at the very end of the season. That's the worst thing he did.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. I remember that happened, and I think you and I were texting each other. And, I think Lovie knew that he was not going to get a chance to continue on. And so he said, you know what? I'm going to show just how egregious it is by winning the final game. And when they let me go, it'll be another example of how Black coaches are held to a different standard, because he really did in the last few games turn the Texans' fortunes around, because Bill O'Brien literally had one of the best QBs, one of the best receivers, and messed that up. And it goes back to that Deadspin headline that I talked to you about, which is sort of 3 rules of being a Black coach. Number 1, if you want to get a job with one of the prime franchises, they have to have, like a 1-15 or 2-14 record. Okay. Number 2, you also have to be prepared to deal with sometimes incredibly racist fan bases and media personalities who will literally question every single thing you do. But then finally, you have to be prepared to deal with ownership, which still has an idea of a winning head coach that more often than not does not look like Black coaches. And that's why I'll always have a special place for the Pittsburgh Steelers in my heart. Whatever it is about the Rooney family, the faith that they place in Mike Tomlin, I think is a model for other NFL owners. And here's, I was going to ask you to give a series of predictions about sports, but I think for time I won't do that. Instead, I have a prediction. And that is that one day when you are accepting your Emmy for sports broadcasting and so forth, your mother, your sister, all of your family from Monroeville, Alabama, all of your family from Greensboro, North Carolina, we're all going to be sitting up there chanting, applauding. And I'm just happy and blessed to be your father and to see this amazing journey unfold. Thank you, son, for being my first guest. Love you so much. Have yourself a great evening. And just again, thank you so much.
Love you too.
All right, folks, that is the end of this episode, kind of a different episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And you have to listen to my voice. You had the chance to finally hear from someone who's younger and brilliant and brings a different and fresh perspective. So this is Trey's Table. And I always end the podcast by saying that I appreciate you taking the time to listen to the podcast. And that motto that I always tell you about, think about good things, that's a motto that I got from my son. Because whatever you seek in life, you will find it. Take care. God bless. And I'll see you guys here the next episode of Trey's Table. Take care.